All right, welcome back to The Right Perspective. We like to do a deep dive every now and then,
Mm-hmm.
and today we've got one that's pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah.
It's we're looking at this plan to dismantle the deep state.
Okay.
Have you heard this term before?
I have heard that, yeah.
Yeah, it's been making the rounds.
Yeah.
And we found this video on Victor Macher's YouTube channel
Okay.
that,
Victor Macher.
yeah, Victor Macher's channel.
Mm-hmm.
It's a plan that is it's attributed to former President Trump
Okay.
on how he would dismantle the deep state.
All right.
And we thought this would be a good one to kind of go through and see
Yeah.
what he has in mind.
That's good.
So the first thing that we saw in this video is that he wants to bring back this executive order from 2020.
Okay.
That would give him a lot more power to fire federal workers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he actually says he'd use it very aggressively.
So essentially, it would give him carte blanche to fire people
Yeah.
based on what, though?
Well, that's a good question.
Right.
So I'm curious from your perspective, what do you see as some of the potential downsides to that?
Well, I mean, I think historically we've seen that whenever a president really tries to expand their own power,
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to controlling who is working in the federal government,
Yeah.
that there's always some pushback from Congress
Wow.
and the courts.
Right.
There's concern about upsetting the balance of power
Yeah.
and about making these jobs just political.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The other thing that he talks about in the video that really caught my eye is he wants to completely overhaul these intelligence and security agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And, he's claiming that they're basically being used as weapons against conservatives and Christians.
Yeah. That's a pretty serious claim.
It is a pretty serious claim.
I think that we really have to look at, what evidence there is to support that. Are we talking about a few isolated incidents, or are we talking about something that's more systematic?
Right.
And then when it comes to like overhauling these agencies, we need to look at, well, what does that really mean? What changes are being proposed?
Yeah.
And how would those changes actually address the concerns while still, doing the job of protecting national security?
Right, right. I mean, we've seen in the past that, sometimes when there have been attempts to, kind of reform intelligence gathering, especially after there's been some kind of, scandal or perceived abuses,
Mm-hmm.
that it kind of can swing the pendulum too far
Absolutely.
the other way.
Yeah. Where it could actually hinder the work that they're trying to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a balance there.
Absolutely.
Another thing that stood out to me was the way he talks about FISA courts.
Okay.
And these courts, as I understand it, they're the ones that handle these surveillance warrants,
Yeah.
especially, in cases of national security.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically saying that these courts are corrupt.
Mm.
And that they're ignoring false information, when they're approving these warrants.
I mean, this isn't a new concern, right?
Right.
I mean, people have been talking about this for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a good example is the Carter Page surveillance
Yeah.
during that whole Trump-Russia investigation.
Right.
This was a case where a lot of people felt that maybe there was an abuse of the FISA process.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really troubling, I think, right?
Absolutely.
Because how do we balance the need for transparency,
Right.
with the need to protect national security
Exactly.
and these sensitive, methods and information?
Yeah, and who gets to decide what's transparent and what's not?
Right.
Right.
So, we're starting to see some of these themes here,
Mm-hmm.
about potential overreach,
Right.
and things like that.
And I think it's important to, for the listeners to keep in mind that we're just kind of laying this out,
Right.
and presenting, what is in this plan.
Right.
We're not trying to say whether it's good or bad,
Exactly.
but just to kind of give people an idea of what's being talked about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to get people thinking, about these things and talking about them.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's move on.
Okay.
The next thing that he mentions in this plan is he wants to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Okay.
Now, have you ever heard of anything like that?
I have.
Okay.
Typically, truth and reconciliation commissions are associated with countries that are trying to heal,
Right.
After conflicts or after periods of authoritarian rule.
So like, after a civil war.
Right. Or, I think a good example would be South Africa after apartheid.
Right.
They had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Right.
And the goal was to expose what had happened in the past. Offer amnesty to people who had done bad things
Cool.
in exchange for, confessing
Right.
and trying to promote reconciliation among different groups in society.
So basically to kind of get everything out in the open
Right.
so that everybody can move on
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. And I think the question is, can that model really be applied to the United States?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that he's talking about using it to investigate what he calls deep state activities.
Right. Like spying.
Right. Spying, censorship, corruption, things like that.
Yeah.
And I think it raises the question, what would be the scope of this commission?
Right.
Would it just focus on certain incidents, or would it try to look at broader patterns of behavior?
Right.
And then the other question is, could it actually work
Right.
in such a politically divided environment?
Yeah. Would it just create more, kind of division and fighting?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Another thing that he mentions is he wants to really crack down on leaks coming out of the government.
Mm-hmm.
And he even suggests, that people should be charged with crimes.
Oh, wow.
Because he feels like these leakers are working with the media to basically undermine his administration.
Yeah, and again, I think that this comes down to this question of how do we balance the need for transparency in government with the need for, national security?
Yeah.
On the one hand, the public has a right to know what the government's doing, especially if there are concerns about, abuses of power.
Right.
But on the other hand, sometimes leaks can really jeopardize, legitimate operations and put people at risk. Right. So, it's a tough question.
Yeah, it's very, very tough.
And it's often, just weighing these competing interests, trying to figure out, where do we draw the line?
Okay, so we've talked about the executive order, giving him more power to fire people. We've talked about overhauling the intelligence and security agencies, the FISA courts, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, cracking down on leakers.
Right.
But he doesn't stop there.
Oh, really?
Oh, he's got more.
Okay.
He goes on to say that he wants to make the Inspector General offices independent from the agencies that they oversee. He wants to set up a separate system to audit intelligence agencies.
Okay.
And he even wants to relocate parts of the federal bureaucracy outside of Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So it's like this big restructuring of government.
It really is. And each of these proposals, I mean, you can see that there are benefits and drawbacks.
Absolutely.
Take, for example, making the Inspector General offices more independent. In theory, that would give them more power to expose wrongdoing.
Right.
Without fear of retaliation.
Right.
But on the other hand, it could also create problems when it comes to coordination and communication.
Yeah.
If we think about relocating federal agencies,
yeah.
Again, in theory, that could, help to distribute power more evenly across the country. But it could also lead to, higher costs and logistical nightmares.
Right.
It's complex.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, speaking of complex issues like this, if you enjoy this kind of analysis, be sure to check out the Right Perspective channel for more episodes on topics just like this that really get you thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, he's got a couple more things up his sleeve here. One of the things is that he says he wants to ban federal workers from taking jobs in the industries that they used to regulate.
Interesting.
He's calling this addressing the revolving door.
Okay.
So what do you think about that?
Well, this revolving door idea, I mean, it's been around for a while. This idea that you've got government officials who, they leave government and then they go work for a company that they used to regulate.
Right.
And critics say that this creates conflicts of interest.
Right.
And, it lets these former officials use their connections for personal gain.
Right.
So, this proposal is trying to address that. But on the other hand, you have to wonder, would it discourage people from working in government in the first place?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. If they knew that they couldn't go work in a certain industry afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
It might limit the pool of talent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, he ends with a proposal for term limits on members of Congress. Now, this is a big one because it would require a change to the Constitution.
A constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a debate that's been going on for decades.
Right.
People who support term limits,
yeah,
they argue that it prevents career politicians. People who get too comfortable in their positions,
right.
They say that, make sure that these elected officials don't get out of touch
Right.
with the people that they're supposed to be representing.
Yeah.
But people who are against term limits, they say that it actually takes away power from the voters.
Right.
Because, it stops them from being able to reelect somebody
Right.
that they really like.
Yeah.
They also worry that it could shift power away from these elected officials and give more power to unelected bureaucrats or to lobbyists.
Right.
So it's a tough issue.
Yeah. It's one of those ones where there are really good arguments on both sides.
Absolutely.
So I think we've pretty much covered the main points here.
Yeah.
This plan to dismantle the deep state, it's certainly ambitious.
It really is.
And it really touches on, some of the most fundamental parts of how our government works.
Yeah, it does. And I think that, when you look at a plan like this, it really raises questions that everybody should think about.
Yeah.
Like, what is the role of government in a democracy?
Right.
How much power should any one person or any one branch of government have?
Right.
And how do we balance individual rights with the need for national security?
Yeah.
I mean, these are questions that have been debated, since this country was founded.
Right.
And they're still relevant today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, that's what we like to do here at The Right Perspective, is to present these ideas and to get people thinking.
Absolutely.
And talking about them.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to visit The Right Perspective channel. We've got tons of great deep dives like this one. Thanks for joining us on The Right Perspective channel.
Here's my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption once and for all. And corruption it is. First, I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively. Second, we will clean out all of the corrupt actors in our national security and intelligence apparatus, and there are plenty of them. The departments and agencies that have been weaponized will be completely overhauled so that faceless bureaucrats will never again be able to target and persecute conservatives, Christians, or the left's political enemies, which they're doing now at a level that nobody can believe even possible. Third, we will totally reform FISA courts, which are so corrupt that the judges seemingly do not care when they are lied to in warrant applications. So many judges have seen so many applications that they know were wrong, or at least they must have known. They do nothing about it. They're lied to. Fourth, to expose the hoaxes and abuses of power that have been tearing our country apart, we will establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to declassify and publish all documents on deep state spying, censorship, and corruption. And there are plenty of them. Fifth, we will launch a major crackdown on government leakers who collude with the fake news to deliberately weave false narratives and to subvert our government and our democracy. When possible, we will press criminal charges. Sixth, we will make every Inspector General's office independent and physically separated from the departments they oversee so they do not become the protectors of the deep state. Seventh, I will ask Congress to establish an independent auditing system to continually monitor our intelligence agencies to ensure they are not spying on our citizens or running disinformation campaigns against the American people, or that they are not spying on someone's campaign like they spied on my campaign. Eighth, we will continue the effort launched by the Trump administration to move parts of the sprawling federal bureaucracy to new locations outside the Washington swamp. Just as I moved the Bureau of Land Management to Colorado, as many as 100,000 government positions could be moved out, and I mean immediately, of Washington to places filled with patriots who love America, and they really do love America. Ninth, I will work to ban federal bureaucrats from taking jobs at the companies they deal with and that they regulate. So they deal with these companies and they regulate these companies, and then they want to take jobs from these companies. Doesn't work that way. Such a public display cannot go on, and it's taking place all the time, like with Big Pharma. Finally, I will push a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on members of Congress. This is how I will shatter the deep state and restore government that is controlled by the people and for the people. Thank you very much.